Welcome, weary soul, to this quiet space of biblical history, where ancient truths unfold like gentle whispers in the darkness of night. If you found your way here, whether seeking solace before sleep or simply yearning for deeper understanding of the divine mysteries that have captivated hearts for millennia, you are exactly where you need to be. I invite you to settle in, to let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders, and to journey with me into one of the most profound and mysterious events ever recorded in the annals of heaven itself. Tonight, we explore a story that predates human civilization, a cosmic drama that unfolded in the very throne room of the Almighty before the first star was kindled or the first breath of life stirred upon the earth. It is the story of the Great Rebellion, the fall of the morning star, the day when perfect harmony was shattered by the sound of war in heaven itself. This is the account of how the most beautiful, most powerful, most exalted of all created beings chose pride over praise, rebellion over reverence, and in doing so, forever altered the spiritual landscape of creation. The story we're about to unfold together isn't merely ancient history. It's the backdrop against which every human struggle with temptation, every choice between good and evil, every moment of moral decision finds its deepest meaning. For in understanding the fall of Lucifer, we begin to comprehend the very nature of free will, the terrible beauty of choice, and the unfathomable love of a God who permits rebellion even knowing its cost. Before we begin this sacred narrative, let me paint for you the scene as it was in the beginning, when all was light and harmony and perfect order. Picture, if you will, the throne room of heaven, not as some distant cold palace of marble and gold, but as the very heart of existence itself, where love flows like rivers of light and worship rises like incense from countless beings who know nothing but joy in their Creator's presence. In this realm beyond time and space, where every thought is pure and every voice joins in perfect harmony, there dwelt beings of such magnificence that human language struggles to contain their glory. These were the angels, the messengers and servants of the Most High, each created with specific gifts, specific purposes, specific places in the grand symphony of celestial praise. Among them were the seraphim, burning with holy fire, who cried out day and night, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." There were the cherubim, guardians of divine mysteries, whose very presence spoke of the unapproachable majesty of God. And there were the archangels, mighty princes of heaven, each commanding legions of lesser angels in the great work of administering God's will throughout the cosmos. But among all these glorious beings, one stood apart, one whose beauty and wisdom and power exceeded all others, save the throne of God itself. His name was Lucifer, which means light-bearer or morning star, and he was indeed the brightest jewel in heaven's crown. Scripture tells us that he was created as a covering cherub, one who stood in the very presence of God, whose wings overshadowed the mercy seat, whose voice led the choirs of heaven in their eternal songs of praise. Ezekiel the prophet, granted a vision of this magnificent being, wrote words that still take the breath away. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you: carnelian, chrysolite and emerald, topaz, onyx and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. Can you imagine such splendor? This was no ordinary angel, but a being crafted with the very hands of God, adorned with beauty that reflected the glory of heaven itself, given wisdom that surpassed all other created minds, granted power that commanded the respect and admiration of countless hosts. Lucifer was, in every sense, the masterpiece of divine artistry, the crown jewel of creation, the one in whom God had invested the fullness of angelic perfection. For ages beyond counting, Lucifer fulfilled his role with what appeared to be perfect devotion. His voice soared above all others in the celestial chorus. His wisdom guided the affairs of heaven. His beauty reflected the glory of the one who made him. He was beloved by his fellow angels, trusted by the Almighty, honored above all created beings. The very foundations of heaven rang with his praise, and his name was spoken with reverence throughout the courts of the Most High. But somewhere in the depths of that perfect heart, something began to stir. It started perhaps as the faintest whisper, the smallest shadow of a thought that should never have been entertained. For in contemplating his own magnificence, in beholding the worship and admiration he received from lesser beings, Lucifer began to forget the source of his glory. The light that he bore, which was meant to reflect the glory of God, began to curve inward, becoming a mirror that showed him only his own splendor. Pride, that most subtle and dangerous of sins, began its insidious work. Not the crude, obvious pride of the ignorant, but the sophisticated, intellectual pride of one who possessed genuine greatness and began to mistake it for self-generated glory. Lucifer began to reason within himself. Am I not the most beautiful? Am I not the wisest? Am I not the most powerful? Why should I serve when I am clearly worthy to be served? Why should I worship when I am clearly worthy of worship? These thoughts, once entertained, grew like a cancer in his perfect mind. The more he contemplated his own glory, the more convinced he became that he was being denied his rightful place. The throne of heaven, he began to reason, should be his. The worship of angels, the praise of creation, the very glory of God himself, surely these belonged to one as magnificent as he. The transformation was gradual, but inexorable. The angel who had once found his greatest joy in reflecting God's glory, now found his greatest pleasure in contemplating his own. The being who had led heaven's worship now began to covet heaven's throne. The light-bearer who had carried God's radiance to every corner of creation now burned with the dark fire of ambition and envy. Isaiah the prophet, granted insight into this cosmic tragedy, recorded words that chill the soul. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. 5 times in this passage, we hear the fatal words, I will. Here is the essence of Lucifer's rebellion, the root of all sin, the source of every evil that has ever plagued creation, the assertion of self-will against the will of God. Not thy will be done, which had been his song for ages, but my will be done, which became his new creed. But Lucifer was too wise to simply declare open rebellion. He was too cunning to stand alone against the throne of heaven. If he was to ascend to the heights he believed he deserved, he would need allies. And so began the great deception, the first lie ever told, the original conspiracy that would tear apart the very fabric of heaven itself. With words smoother than oil and arguments more subtle than serpents, Lucifer began to move among his fellow angels, planting seeds of doubt, nurturing grievances, fostering ambition. To some, he whispered about the unfairness of their stations. To others, he spoke of the glory they deserved, but were denied. To still others, he painted pictures of a new order, a better way, a revolution that would elevate them all to positions more befitting their dignity and worth. His arguments were sophisticated, his logic compelling, his promises intoxicating. He spoke not as a crude rebel, but as a philosopher of liberation, a champion of justice, a visionary of progress. He convinced angels that their worship was wasted on one who hoarded glory for himself, that their service was slavery disguised as honor, that their submission was a barrier to their own divine potential. One by one, angels began to listen. One by one, hearts that had known only love and loyalty began to harbor doubt and discontent. One by one, voices that had joined in perfect harmony began to whisper of change, of revolution, of a new day when they would no longer bow, but would themselves be worshipped. The corruption spread like fire through dry grass. Scripture tells us that 1/3 of heaven's angels were eventually drawn into Lucifer's web of deception, seduced by his promises, convinced by his arguments, blinded by his charisma. These were not weak or foolish beings, but mighty angels, principalities and powers, beings of great wisdom and strength, who nevertheless chose to follow the morning star in his mad quest for a throne that was never meant to be his. As the rebellion took shape, heaven itself began to tremble. The perfect harmony that had reigned since the foundation of the world was shattered by discord. The eternal songs of praise were interrupted by whispers of sedition. The very atmosphere of heaven, once pure with love and worship, became charged with tension and conflict. But through it all, God watched and waited, not because he was unaware of what was transpiring, for nothing is hidden from his sight, but because love cannot be forced, and worship has no meaning unless it is freely given. The Almighty, who could have snuffed out the rebellion with a word, who could have unmade Lucifer with a thought, chose instead to let the drama play out, to allow free will its full expression, even knowing the terrible cost. For God understood what Lucifer in his pride could not, that forced obedience is not love, that compelled worship is not praise, that a universe of robots would be no universe at all. The risk of rebellion was the price of real relationship. The possibility of betrayal was the cost of genuine trust, and the potential for hatred was the shadow cast by the light of love itself. And so the stage was set for the most momentous confrontation in the history of creation. A battle that would determine not only the fate of heaven, but the destiny of countless worlds yet to be born. On one side stood Lucifer, the morning star, the light bearer, the most beautiful and powerful of all created beings, leading 1/3 of heaven's hosts in rebellion against their creator. On the other stood the throne of God, defended by Michael the archangel and the loyal hosts of heaven, fighting not for conquest, but for truth, not for glory, but for love. The battle, when it came, would shake the very foundations of existence. But that, dear friends, is a story for the chapters yet to come. For now, let us pause in this quiet moment before the storm, in this last breath of peace before the first war, and contemplate the terrible beauty of choice, the awful weight of freedom, and the unfathomable love of a God who permits rebellion, even in his own house, because love cannot exist without the possibility of its rejection. Rest now in the knowledge that even in the darkest moments of cosmic history, even when angels fall and heavens shake, the throne of God remains unshaken, his love remains unchanged, and his purposes remain sure. The morning star may have chosen darkness, but the true light of the world was already shining in the heart of the Father, ready to heal every wound that pride would inflict, to restore every relationship that rebellion would break, and to offer redemption even to those who had chosen the path of destruction. Sleep well, knowing that the God who permitted Lucifer's choice also prepared the way for every choice to be redeemed, every heart to be healed, and every soul to find its way home to the love from which it came. As the echoes of rebellion spread through the celestial realm, the very foundations of heaven trembled with the weight of what was unfolding. The harmony that had once defined the eternal courts now fractured like crystal struck by lightning, each crack reverberating through dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. What had begun as whispers of discontent in the heart of one angel had become a cosmic schism that would forever alter the nature of existence itself. Picture, if you will, the moment when perfection first encountered its own shadow. For eons upon eons, heaven had known only order, only peace, only the perfect symphony of countless voices raised in unified praise. But now, as Lucifer's influence spread like ripples across still water, something unprecedented was happening. Angels who had never known doubt began to question. Beings who had existed in perfect contentment started to wonder if there might be something more, something different, something better. The beauty of it all was both terrible and magnificent. These were not crude rebels driven by base desires, but radiant beings of immense power and intelligence, each one a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship. They moved with the grace of starlight and spoke with voices like music itself. Yet now, divided loyalties created a tension that hung in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. Some remained steadfast in their devotion, their faces shining with unwavering faith. Others wavered, caught between the familiar comfort of obedience and the intoxicating promise of something new. And at the center of it all stood Lucifer, more magnificent than ever in his defiance. His rebellion had not diminished his beauty, but had given it a new quality, like a flame that burns brighter just before it consumes itself. He moved through the heavenly courts with the confidence of one who believed himself to be awakening from a dream, gathering followers not through force, but through the sheer magnetism of his presence and the compelling nature of his arguments. "Why should we serve when we could rule?" he whispered to those who would listen. "Why should we bow when we could stand as equals? Are we not also children of light? Are we not also possessed of power and wisdom and beauty?" His words were like honey laced with poison, sweet to taste, but carrying within them the seeds of destruction. The loyal angels watched in growing alarm as their brothers and sisters began to gather around this new banner of rebellion. These were not strangers or enemies, but beloved companions with whom they had sung the ancient songs and danced the celestial dances. To see them turning away, to watch the light in their eyes change from devotion to defiance, was a grief beyond description. It was like watching the stars themselves begin to fall from their appointed places in the sky. Yet through it all, the Father remained silent. This silence was perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the entire cosmic drama. Here was rebellion in his very presence, defiance in his own house, and yet no immediate judgment fell. No thunderbolt struck the rebels down. No voice of rebuke echoed through the halls of eternity. The silence stretched on, heavy with meaning that even the angels struggled to understand. Some interpreted this silence as permission, as if the Father's lack of immediate action somehow validated their choice to follow Lucifer. Others saw it as a test, a divine patience that allowed free will to run its course even when that course led toward destruction. Still others recognized it as the profound sadness of a parent watching beloved children choose a path that would lead them away from home, away from love, away from everything good and beautiful and true. As the rebellion gained momentum, the very nature of heaven began to change. Where once there had been perfect unity, now there were factions. Where once every voice had joined in harmonious praise, now there were heated debates and whispered conspiracies. The light itself seemed different, as if the presence of rebellion had introduced shadows where none had existed before. It was as though the cosmos itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented crisis would resolve. The faithful angels found themselves in an impossible position. These rebels were not strangers or invaders, but their own kindred, beings they had known and loved since the dawn of their existence. How do you fight against your own family? How do you stand against those who once stood beside you in perfect fellowship? The pain of this division cut deeper than any physical wound could have done. Michael, the great archangel whose name means "who is like God," found himself thrust into a role he had never imagined. As the rebellion crystallized into something approaching open war, he became the rallying point for those who remained loyal. His magnificent form blazed with righteous fire as he called the faithful to remember their purpose, their joy, their love for the one who had created them all. "We are not slaves," he declared, his voice ringing like a trumpet across the heavenly realms. "We are sons and daughters, invited into the very heart of divine love. What Lucifer offers is not freedom, but the coldest slavery of all. Slavery to pride, to ambition, to the endless hunger that can never be satisfied." But Lucifer was ready with his counter-arguments, his voice smooth as silk and twice as seductive. "Look at Michael," he said to his followers. "See how quickly he kneels, how eagerly he serves. Is this the dignity befitting a being of such power and glory? We were made for greater things than eternal servitude, no matter how sweetly it is disguised as love." The philosophical battle raged alongside the spiritual one. What was freedom? What was love? What was the proper relationship between the created and the creator? These questions, which had never needed asking in the perfect harmony of unfallen heaven, now became the fault lines along which the entire celestial realm began to split. As the crisis deepened, something unprecedented began to happen. The very structure of reality started to bend under the weight of this cosmic rebellion. Time, which had flowed like a gentle river through eternity, began to eddy and swirl in strange patterns. Space itself seemed to ripple and distort as the fundamental order that held everything together came under assault. This was not merely a political rebellion or even a military one. It was an ontological catastrophe that threatened the very foundations of existence. The Father's silence during this period was not indifference, but infinite patience mixed with infinite sorrow. He watched his beloved children choose darkness over light, bondage over freedom, death over life, and his heart broke with a pain that no mortal could comprehend. Yet still he waited. Still he hoped. Still he left the door open for repentance and return. But Lucifer had gone too far to turn back now. His pride had become a molten core at the center of his being, burning away everything else until only the rebellion remained. He no longer fought for freedom or dignity or any of the noble ideals he had proclaimed. Now he fought simply because he could not bear to submit, could not endure the thought of bowing before the throne he had once hoped to claim as his own. The angels who followed him began to change as well. The light that had once made them beautiful started to dim and flicker, not because it was taken from them, but because they were turning away from its source. Their faces, once radiant with joy and peace, became marked with the stress of constant striving, the weariness of fighting a war that could never truly be won. As the rebellion reached its climax, heaven itself seemed to groan under the strain. The very foundations of the eternal city shook as the cosmic order that had held everything in perfect balance began to fracture. This was the moment toward which everything had been building, the point of no return beyond which there could be no reconciliation, no restoration, no hope of return to the way things had been. The silence of the Father was about to end. The patience that had endured through all the arguments and accusations and acts of defiance was about to give way to justice. Not the harsh, vindictive justice that fallen beings might imagine, but the pure, necessary justice that preserves the integrity of love itself. For love without justice is not love at all, but mere sentiment. And justice without love is not justice, but cruelty. What happened next would echo through all of creation, from the highest heaven to the deepest hell, from the beginning of time to its ultimate end. The day of reckoning had come, and with it, the terrible necessity of banishment, of casting out those who had chosen darkness over light, rebellion over submission, pride over love. Yet even in this moment of ultimate crisis, the heart of God remained unchanged. His love for his rebellious children did not waver, even as his justice demanded their separation from the realm of perfect holiness. This was not revenge, but rescue. Not just the rescue of heaven from the poison of rebellion, but the rescue of free will itself, the preservation of the terrible and wonderful gift of choice that made love possible in the first place. The story that began with whispers of discontent was about to reach its climax in a cosmic battle that would reshape the very nature of reality. But even as the forces of heaven prepared for war, even as the rebels steeled themselves for their final assault on the throne of God, the deepest truth remained unchanged. This was still, at its heart, a story about love. Love offered, love rejected, love that endures even in the face of ultimate betrayal. The gentle reign of eternity was about to become a storm that would shake the foundations of all that is. And in that storm, the true nature of both justice and mercy would be revealed in ways that would echo through every age and every realm, teaching lessons about the cost of rebellion and the price of freedom that would never be forgotten. The day of banishment was at hand, and with it, the birth of a new kind of story, one that would require redemption, sacrifice, and a love so profound that it would willingly descend into the very darkness that rebellion had created, seeking to bring light even there. Part 3. The Divine Judgment and Earthly Banishment. The air in heaven grew heavy with an unspoken dread, thick as storm clouds gathering before a tempest. What had begun as whispered doubts in shadowed corners had now crystallized into open rebellion, a cancer that had spread through the celestial ranks with terrifying speed. The time for patience, for gentle correction, for mercy extended in love, had reached its end. Even the infinite compassion of the Almighty could not forever endure such brazen defiance of his divine order. In the throne room of heaven, where light itself bowed in reverence, a profound silence descended. It was not the peaceful quiet of worship, but the ominous stillness that precedes divine judgment. The very foundations of eternity seemed to hold their breath as God prepared to act with the terrible swiftness of perfect justice. For though he had watched with patient sorrow as his beloved Lucifer gathered his followers, though he had extended countless opportunities for repentance, the moment had come when love itself demanded action. The rebellion had reached its fever pitch. Nearly a third of heaven's host now stood arrayed behind their fallen prince, their faces set with determination born of pride and delusion. They had convinced themselves that their cause was just, that their grievances were righteous, that somehow they could improve upon perfection itself. How thoroughly pride had blinded them to the madness of their enterprise. They stood now as armies before a fortress they could never hope to breach, wielding weapons against an enemy they could never defeat, fighting a war they had already lost before the first blow was struck. And yet, even in this darkest hour, traces of God's mercy could still be seen. He did not strike them down in an instant, though he possessed the power to unmake them with a single thought. He did not strip them of their existence without warning, though their treachery deserved nothing less. Instead, he rose from his throne with the weight of infinite sorrow, his voice carrying across the celestial realms with the finality of divine decree. The judgment would be just, but it would also be measured, proportionate to the gravity of their choice. Lucifer, the voice of the Almighty, resonated through every corner of heaven, each syllable carrying the weight of eternal consequence. You who were created in beauty and perfection, you who walked among the stones of fire, you who were anointed as the covering cherub, behold what pride has wrought in your heart. The fallen prince stood defiant even now, his magnificent form still bearing traces of his former glory, though dimmed and twisted by the corruption of rebellion. His followers flanked him on either side, a host of angels whose light had grown cold, whose songs had turned to discord, whose very beings now resonated with the frequency of opposition rather than harmony. They had made their choice, and that choice was written in every line of their faces, every gesture of their forms. You have said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. God continued, his words echoing the very thoughts that had festered in Lucifer's heart. But pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The judgment was swift and terrible in its finality. Like lightning cast down from heaven, like stars falling from their courses, the rebel host was expelled from the holy mountain of God. The very atmosphere of heaven seemed to convulse as they were torn from their rightful place, their cries of shock and dismay echoing through the celestial realms as they plummeted toward the earth below. What had been a realm of perfect harmony suddenly erupted in cosmic upheaval as the rebels were cast out with the force of divine wrath. Lucifer himself, once the morning star whose brightness had adorned the courts of heaven, now fell like lightning from the sky. His beautiful form, corrupted by pride and rebellion, blazed across the heavens as he descended, a meteor of malice streaking toward his exile. The very air seemed to burn around him as he fell, his glory transformed into something terrible and alien, his beauty becoming a fearsome mockery of what he had once been. Behind him came his followers, a host of angels whose rebellion had cost them everything. They who had once soared through the heavenly realms on wings of light, now tumbled through space, like stones cast from a great height. Their songs of worship had become wails of anguish, their robes of righteousness torn and tattered by the violence of their expulsion. They had chosen to follow their prince into rebellion, and now they would follow him into exile, their fate forever bound to his by the chains of their own making. The earth itself seemed to recoil as this host of fallen beings crashed into its surface. Mountains shook, seas roiled, and the very foundations of the world groaned under the impact of their arrival. What had been a pristine creation now bore the scars of their landing, the perfect order of Eden disrupted by the presence of those who had brought chaos into being. The serpent had entered the garden, and with him came the shadow of corruption that would soon engulf all of creation. In the wake of their expulsion, heaven itself seemed to exhale in relief. The toxic atmosphere of rebellion was purged, the harmony of worship restored, the perfect order of divine love re-established. The loyal angels, those who had remained faithful through the crisis, now understood in a deeper way the preciousness of their position, the privilege of dwelling in the presence of the Almighty. They had witnessed firsthand the consequences of pride and rebellion, and their devotion was purified by what they had seen. Yet even as heaven rejoiced in the restoration of its peace, there was sorrow for what had been lost. These were not strangers who had been cast out, but brothers and sisters in the faith, fellow servants who had shared in the glory of divine service. Their fall was not celebrated, but mourned. Their loss felt keenly by those who remained. The price of free will had been paid in full, and the cost was higher than anyone could have imagined. Michael the archangel, who had led the faithful in their stand against rebellion, now surveyed the aftermath with a heavy heart. He had been forced to raise his sword against those he had once called friends, to drive from heaven's gates angels with whom he had once sung in perfect harmony. The victory was complete, but it was a victory that brought no joy, only the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled and justice served. Gabriel, whose voice had so often carried the messages of divine love, now spoke words of comfort to the heavenly host. He reminded them that though the rebellion had caused great pain, it had also revealed the true character of love itself. God's love was not weak or permissive, but strong enough to make difficult choices, firm enough to maintain the boundaries that kept evil from corrupting good. The banishment of the rebels was not an act of hatred, but of love. Love for the innocent, love for the pure, love for the order that allowed all of creation to flourish. And what of Lucifer himself, now transformed into Satan, the adversary, the accuser of the brethren? He found himself cast down to a realm far removed from the glory he had known, stripped of his position as covering cherub, exiled from the presence of the God he had sought to usurp. His beauty was not entirely destroyed, but it was corrupted, twisted into something that inspired fear rather than admiration. His intelligence remained, but it was now bent toward destructive purposes, his creativity channeled into schemes of malice and deception. The earth that received him was not the earth we know today, scarred by sin and death. This was the pristine creation, the world as God had made it in the beginning, perfect and beautiful and good. But with the arrival of Satan and his host, a new element entered the equation: the possibility of corruption, the potential for the perfect to be made imperfect, the threat that innocence might be lost. Satan surveyed his new domain with eyes that burned with unquenched ambition and unrepentant pride. Though he had been defeated in heaven, though he had been cast down from his high position, his war against God was far from over. If he could not ascend to the throne of the Most High, then perhaps he could drag God's creation down with him. If he could not rule in heaven, then he would establish his kingdom on earth, building his power on the ruins of innocence and the ashes of obedience. The stage was now set for the next act in the cosmic drama. God's creation stood pristine and perfect, inhabited by beings made in his own image, Adam and Eve, walking in innocence and fellowship with their Creator. They knew nothing of rebellion or pride, nothing of sin or death. Their world was Eden, paradise, a place where heaven touched earth and divine love flowed freely through every aspect of existence. But now, lurking in the shadows of this perfect world, was the enemy of all that was good and pure. Satan had been banished from heaven, but he had not been destroyed. His rebellion had been defeated, but his malice remained undiminished. And in his twisted mind, a new plan was already taking shape. A plan to corrupt what God had made pure, to introduce sin where there had been only righteousness, to bring death into a world that had known only life. The serpent was subtle, more cunning than any beast of the field. He would not attack with force, for he had learned the futility of direct confrontation with divine power. Instead, he would work through deception and temptation, planting seeds of doubt where there had been only trust, suggesting that perhaps God was not as good as he seemed, that perhaps his commands were not as wise as they appeared, that perhaps there was a better way than the way of obedience and love. The banishment from heaven was complete. The rebels cast down, never to return to their former glory. But the consequences of their rebellion would ripple outward through all of creation, touching every corner of existence with the poison of sin and death. What had begun as a whisper of pride in the heart of one angel would become a roar of chaos that would shake the very foundations of the world. Yet even in this darkest moment, even as the shadow of corruption fell across the earth, the seeds of redemption were already being sown. For God, in his infinite wisdom and love, had not been caught off guard by the rebellion. He had foreseen from the beginning the choice that Lucifer would make, the fall that would follow, the corruption that would spread throughout creation. And he had already prepared the answer, not just judgment, but mercy, not just justice, but grace, not just the banishment of evil, but the promise of restoration and renewal. The story of the fallen angels was not just a tale of rebellion and exile, but the opening chapter of a greater story, the story of redemption, of love that would go to any length to rescue what was lost, of a God who would not let evil have the final word. The banishment was complete, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of something even greater, the demonstration of a love so powerful that it could transform even the greatest tragedy into the foundation for the greatest triumph. The gentle whisper of ancient winds carries us deeper into the sacred narrative, where the threads of prophecy begin to weave together in ways that might surprise even the most devoted students of Scripture. As we settle into this portion of our journey, let your mind drift peacefully through the corridors of time, where the story of Persia unfolds like a tapestry painted by divine hands. In the soft glow of candlelight, imagine yourself in the quiet chambers of Daniel's dwelling in Babylon. The night air is still, broken only by the distant sounds of an empire that believes itself eternal. Yet here, in this humble space, heaven is about to unveil secrets that will echo through millennia. Daniel, now an elderly man with eyes that have seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, receives another vision that will pierce through the veil of time itself. Picture the scene as it unfolds in the sacred text. Daniel stands by the great river Ulai, its waters flowing gently beneath the star-filled sky. The peaceful surface suddenly breaks as a magnificent ram emerges from the depths of his vision. This is no ordinary creature, but a symbol laden with meaning that will reverberate through the ages. The ram bears 2 horns, yet one rises higher than the other, growing stronger as Daniel watches in wonder. The interpretation comes like a gentle breeze carrying wisdom from the throne room of heaven. The 2-horned ram represents the kings of Media and Persia, with Persia eventually overshadowing its partner, just as the taller horn dominated in the vision. Here we see the prophetic blueprint of an empire that would reshape the ancient world, an empire that God himself had ordained for purposes both magnificent and mysterious. As Daniel's vision continues to unfold in the tranquil night, the ram charges westward, northward, and southward, conquering all in its path. Nothing can stand against its mighty advance. The imagery is both beautiful and terrible, like watching storm clouds gather on a distant horizon. This is Persia in its glory, the empire that would sweep across continents, gathering nations under its banner like a shepherd gathering sheep. But then, as quickly as lightning splits the evening sky, another figure appears in the vision. From the west comes a goat, moving with such supernatural speed that its feet barely touch the earth. Upon its head sits a single, prominent horn, and with fierce determination, it races toward the mighty ram. The collision, when it comes, is devastating. The ram that seemed invincible is shattered, its power broken, its dominion ended in a moment. This goat, Daniel learns, represents the kingdom of Greece, and its great horn is the first king who would arise. Though the vision speaks in symbols, we who look back through history can see the fulfillment with crystalline clarity. Alexander the Great, moving with speed that defied comprehension, would indeed shatter the Persian Empire, conquering the known world before his 33rd birthday. Yet even as this vision reveals Persia's eventual fall, we must remember that it also confirms something profound about God's sovereign plan. Every empire, every kingdom, every earthly power exists within the framework of divine purpose. Persia would rise not by accident, but by appointment. It would fall not by chance, but according to the predetermined counsel of heaven. In the quiet moments that follow this revelation, we might wonder at the intricate nature of prophecy. How could Daniel, centuries before these events, see with such precision the rise and fall of empires? How could the divine mind orchestrate events across generations, weaving together the choices of kings and the movements of nations into a tapestry of perfect design? The answer lies in the very nature of the one who sits enthroned above the earth, for whom 1,000 years are as a single day. From his eternal perspective, the rise of Cyrus, the conquests of Alexander, and even the modern tensions we witness today are all part of a story being told across the ages. Each chapter builds upon the last, moving inexorably toward a conclusion that will vindicate every promise and fulfill every prophecy. As we rest in this understanding, we begin to see that Persia's role in biblical prophecy extends far beyond mere historical curiosity. This ancient empire becomes a lens through which we can glimpse the character of God himself. He is the one who raises up nations and brings them low, who uses earthly powers to accomplish heavenly purposes, who can turn the heart of a pagan king to serve his covenant people. The story of Persia reminds us that no earthly power, no matter how mighty, exists independently of divine oversight. Yet it also reveals a God who is patient, working through generations to accomplish his purposes, allowing even those who do not know him to play crucial roles in the unfolding drama of redemption. As we allow these truths to settle into our hearts like snow falling on quiet fields, we prepare ourselves for what lies ahead in our journey. For the story of Persia is far from over, and the threads we have begun to trace will lead us into even deeper mysteries, revealing connections between ancient prophecies and modern realities that may leave us marveling at the intricate wisdom of the one who holds all of history in his hands. The gentle morning light filtered through the palace windows of Persepolis, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed the footsteps of kings for generations. Here, in the heart of the Persian Empire, a different kind of awakening was beginning to stir. Not the awakening of armies or the march of conquest, but something far more profound, something that would echo through the corridors of eternity itself. As we've journeyed together through the rise of this magnificent empire, we've seen how God's hand moved through the decrees of Cyrus, the courage of Esther, and the visions granted to Daniel. But now, as the empire reached its zenith under kings like Darius and Xerxes, a new chapter was beginning to unfold. One that would reveal not just the political might of Persia, but its role in preparing the world for something unprecedented. The morning prayers echoed through the fire temples scattered across the empire, where Zoroastrian priests tended flames that had burned for centuries. Yet even as these ancient rituals continued, something new was stirring in the hearts of men. The Jewish communities, now established throughout the Persian provinces, carried with them not just their traditions, but their prophecies. And those prophecies spoke of a time when the nations would be gathered, when knowledge would increase, when the scattered would be brought home. In the royal archives of Susa, scribes meticulously recorded the movements of peoples across the empire. Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Lydians, and dozens of other nations now found themselves under the protection of Persian law. What they could not have known was that this vast gathering of peoples was itself part of a divine design. For the first time in human history, the known world was largely united under a single, relatively benevolent ruler. Roads stretched from India to Ethiopia, carrying not just merchants and soldiers, but ideas, languages, and, most importantly, the knowledge of the God of Israel. The Persian administrative system, with its careful organization and communication networks, had created something unprecedented. Messages could travel from the far reaches of India to the Mediterranean coast in a matter of weeks. This infrastructure, built for governance and trade, would become the very pathways through which divine revelation would one day spread to the ends of the earth. But even as this golden age flourished, those who studied the ancient texts began to notice that the prophecies spoke of more than just political restoration. Daniel's visions had revealed a sequence of empires, And Persia, for all its glory, was but the second in that divine timeline. The silver chest and arms of the great statue would give way to bronze, then iron, then something mixed and unstable. The empire that had restored God's people would itself face its own appointed time of transition. In the Jewish quarter of Babylon, elderly scribes who had witnessed the return to Jerusalem now spent their days copying and preserving the sacred writings. They understood that their generation was living through prophecy fulfilled, but they also sensed that greater fulfillments lay ahead. The temple had been rebuilt, yes, but it lacked the glory of Solomon's original structure. The people had returned to their land, but they remained under foreign rule. The promises seemed to point towards something greater still to come. Young Persian nobles, educated in the wisdom traditions of multiple cultures, found themselves drawn to these Hebrew scriptures. There was something in the moral clarity of the Jewish law, something in the historical precision of their prophecies, that resonated with minds trained in Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Some began to wonder if these ancient writings contained insights that even their own Magian priests had not fully grasped. The influence flowed both ways. Persian concepts of administration, of just rule, of protection for subject peoples began to shape Jewish understanding of how God might govern not just Israel, but all nations. The vision of a worldwide kingdom of righteousness, where justice would flow like waters and peace like a mighty stream, took on new dimensions as Jewish thinkers observed the Persian model of diverse peoples united under wise and beneficent rule. In the palace gardens of Ecbatana, King Darius would sometimes walk in the evening, contemplating the weight of ruling so vast an empire. He had read the Hebrew chronicles that spoke of his role in God's plan, though he did not worship their God as they did. Still, there was something compelling about a deity who could orchestrate the rise and fall of empires, who could name kings before they were born, who could turn the hearts of rulers to accomplish purposes they barely understood. The Magian priests who served as advisors to the Persian court had their own traditions of watching the stars, interpreting signs, preparing for the coming of divine light into the world. These traditions, passed down through generations, spoke of a time when a great king would be born, when the cosmic struggle between good and evil would reach its climax, when the forces of darkness would be finally overcome. What they could not have known was how closely their expectations aligned with Hebrew prophecies of a coming Messiah. As trade routes carried Persian gold and silver across the known world, they also carried ideas. Greek merchants heard Persian tales of cosmic justice. Egyptian priests encountered Zoroastrian concepts of resurrection, and everywhere the Jewish communities established by Persian policy served as living reminders that the God of Israel was not merely a tribal deity, but one who claimed sovereignty over all nations and all peoples. The young men trained in the Persian administrative schools learned to think in terms of universal principles rather than local customs. They studied law codes that applied equally to all subjects regardless of their ethnic background. They administered justice that was meant to reflect cosmic order rather than mere human preference. These concepts, revolutionary in their scope, prepared minds and hearts for the possibility that divine truth itself might be universal, that salvation might extend beyond the boundaries of any single nation. In the quiet moments between the grand ceremonies and the urgent dispatches, between the building of monuments and the expansion of borders, a deeper transformation was taking place. The Persian Empire was becoming more than a political entity. It was becoming a crucible in which the hopes and dreams of many peoples were being refined and purified, prepared for something greater than anyone could yet imagine. The roads that carried Persian armies also carried Persian tolerance. The communication systems that coordinated taxation also coordinated cultural exchange. The legal frameworks that maintained order also maintained space for diverse forms of worship. Without intending it, perhaps without even realizing it, the Persian Empire was creating the conditions in which divine revelation could spread more rapidly and more widely than ever before in human history. As night fell over the great cities of the empire, from Persepolis to Babylon to Susa, the flames in the fire temples continued to burn. But they were no longer the only lights piercing the darkness. In Jewish homes, Sabbath candles flickered with their own sacred fire. In Persian administrative centers, scholars bent over scrolls that spoke of divine purposes, transcending human kingdoms. And somewhere in the vast tapestry of peoples and cultures that made up this remarkable empire, the stage was being set for the next act in the great drama of redemption. The empire that had begun with Cyrus's decree would continue to play its role in the divine plan. But its greatest contribution might not be its military victories or architectural wonders. Its greatest legacy might be the way it had prepared the world to receive something unprecedented. Something that would transform not just kingdoms and empires, but the very nature of what it means to be human. In the gentle morning light that blessed the Persian Empire, the seeds of something eternal were quietly taking root. And though those who planted them could not see the harvest that was to come, they were faithful to their calling, preparing the way for a revelation that would change everything. Part 6. The War in Heaven and Divine Justice. The silence that followed Lucifer's rebellion was profound, yet it was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy quiet that comes before judgment, the stillness that precedes divine action. For in the celestial realms, where harmony had once reigned supreme, a great war was about to unfold, a conflict that would shake the very foundations of heaven itself. Picture, if you will, the pristine halls of heaven suddenly filled with the sound of battle, the clash of spiritual forces echoing through dimensions we can barely comprehend. This was not a war fought with earthly weapons, but a cosmic struggle between the forces of light and darkness, between divine order and rebellious chaos. Michael the Archangel, whose name means "who is like God," stood at the forefront of the heavenly host. His sword blazed with righteous fire as he faced the fallen cherub who had once stood beside him in worship. The irony was not lost on those who witnessed this moment. The very being who had been created to reflect God's glory was now marshalling forces against his creator. The battle lines were drawn with devastating clarity. On one side stood Michael and the loyal angels, their faces set with the determination of those who serve the Most High. Their armor gleamed with celestial light, and their weapons hummed with divine power. They fought not for personal gain or glory, but for the preservation of God's perfect order. On the other side, Lucifer led his rebellious host, a third of heaven's angels who had chosen to follow him into darkness. These fallen beings, once radiant with divine light, now bore the marks of their rebellion. Their glory had become corruption, their wisdom had turned to cunning, and their beauty had transformed into something altogether more sinister. The war that ensued was unlike anything that had ever been witnessed in creation. It was not merely a physical conflict, but a spiritual battle that touched the very essence of existence itself. The clash between good and evil, order and chaos, played out on a scale that dwarfed any earthly conflict. Yet even as the battle raged, God's justice was already in motion. For this was not a war where the outcome was in doubt. The Creator of all things was not surprised by this rebellion, nor was he threatened by it. In his infinite wisdom, he had already determined the consequences of Lucifer's choices and those who had chosen to follow him. The judgment, when it came, was swift and final. With a word from the Almighty, the rebels were cast out of heaven like lightning falling from the sky. The very realm that had once been their home now expelled them, and they found themselves hurled into the darkness of exile. banished from the presence of the one they had rejected. Lucifer, who had sought to ascend to the highest heavens, now found himself cast down to the lowest depths. The Prince of Angels became the Prince of Demons, and his followers shared in his disgrace. They who had once sung praises to God now could only rage against his righteousness. But even in this moment of judgment, we see something remarkable about the character of God. For while justice demanded that rebellion be punished, mercy was not entirely absent. The fallen angels were not immediately destroyed, though they certainly deserved such a fate. Instead, they were given time. Time that would ultimately serve God's greater purposes in the unfolding drama of creation. This banishment of the rebellious angels had profound implications for the world that was yet to be created. For these fallen beings, led by their proud and cunning leader, would not simply fade into obscurity. They would become active opponents of God's plan, seeking to corrupt and destroy everything that reflected his goodness and glory. As they fell from heaven's heights, these rebellious spirits brought with them all the malice and hatred that had grown in their hearts. They carried the poison of pride, the bitterness of rejection, and the fury of those who had gambled everything on rebellion and lost. Their very presence in the lower realms would introduce an element of chaos and corruption that had never before existed in God's perfect creation. Yet even this apparent victory for evil would ultimately serve the purposes of divine justice. For God, in his infinite wisdom, would use even the rebellion of angels to demonstrate his own glory and to provide a backdrop against which his mercy and grace could shine all the brighter. The war in heaven was over, but its consequences would reverberate throughout all of creation. The earth, which had been formed as a perfect sphere of divine creativity, would now become a battlefield where the cosmic conflict between good and evil would continue to play out. And humanity, yet to be created, would find themselves at the very center of this ancient struggle. But that is a story for another part of our journey through the corridors of eternity. For now, let us simply rest in the knowledge that even in the midst of cosmic rebellion and divine judgment, God's sovereignty remains absolute. His justice is perfect. His mercy is infinite, and his ultimate plan for creation cannot be thwarted by any force in heaven or earth. The silence that now filled heaven was different from before. It was the silence of a realm purified, a domain cleansed of rebellion and restored to its proper order. The angels who remained faithful now sang with even greater appreciation for the holiness of their Creator, having witnessed firsthand the terrible consequences of pride and rebellion. And in that silence, in that peace restored, we can hear the echoes of a truth that would sustain the faithful throughout all the trials to come. That no matter how fierce the storm of rebellion may rage, no matter how dark the night of evil may seem, the dawn of God's justice will always break, and his kingdom will stand forever. The weight of judgment settles like evening mist across the heavenly courts. In this seventh part of our journey through the story of Lucifer's banishment, we find ourselves at the threshold of divine justice, where the consequences of rebellion must finally unfold. The air itself seems to hold its breath as heaven prepares for what must come to pass. Picture, if you will, the celestial realm in those final moments before the decree. The very foundations of paradise trembled with the gravity of what was about to occur. Angels who had served faithfully since the dawn of creation now found themselves witnesses to the most solemn pronouncement ever to echo through the halls of eternity. The light that had always danced so freely through heaven's corridors seemed dimmed by the shadow of impending judgment. Lucifer stood before the throne, no longer the radiant being of light he once was. The corruption of pride had worked its terrible transformation. Where once his beauty had reflected the glory of the Almighty, now his countenance bore the marks of his chosen rebellion. The very air around him seemed to grow cold, as if the warmth of divine love could no longer penetrate the barrier of his hardened heart. The silence stretched across the heavenly realm like a vast ocean. Every angel, every seraph, every cherub waited with bated breath. They had witnessed the rebellion unfold, had seen the division tear through their ranks like lightning splitting the sky. Now they would witness justice itself take form and speak with the voice of the eternal. When the voice of the Almighty finally broke that cosmic silence, it carried within it the weight of infinite sorrow and immutable justice. "You have chosen your path, morning star," the words resonated through every corner of creation. "You who were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, until iniquity was found in you. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor." The pronouncement continued, each word falling like drops of eternity into the pool of time. "You shall be cast out of the mountain of God, and you shall be destroyed from the midst of the fiery stones. You shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit." As these words were spoken, a transformation began to take place. The light that had once emanated from Lucifer's being started to fade, not gradually, but in waves, as if the very source of his illumination was being withdrawn. The angels watched in solemn wonder as the most beautiful of all created beings began his descent from glory into darkness. But this was not merely a physical banishment. It was a spiritual severing, a cutting away of the rebellious one from the source of all life and light. The other angels, who had chosen to follow Lucifer in his rebellion, felt the same terrible separation begin to work within them. One by one, they too began to fall, their own light dimming as they were drawn into the wake of their fallen leader. The speed of their descent was both instantaneous and eternal. Like lightning falling from heaven, Jesus would later describe it. Yet for those experiencing this cosmic exile, it seemed to stretch across eons. Down they fell, through dimensions of reality that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend, leaving behind the realm of perfect love and entering the domain of their own choosing. As they fell, the very nature of their being began to change. The angels who had once sung hosannas in perfect harmony now found their voices twisted by the bitterness of their rebellion. The hands that had once served in the temple of the Most High now grasped at shadows and emptiness. The wings that had carried them through the corridors of heaven now bore them only deeper into the abyss of their own making. The other angels, those who had remained faithful, watched this great tragedy unfold with hearts heavy with grief. They had lost brothers, companions who had stood beside them in worship and service. The loss was profound, cutting through the heavenly host like a sword of sorrow. Yet they also understood the necessity of what was happening. Justice demanded that rebellion receive its due consequence. In the depths to which they were cast, Lucifer and his followers found themselves in a realm entirely different from the heaven they had known. Gone was the constant presence of divine love that had once sustained them. Gone was the light that had illuminated their existence. Instead, they found themselves in a place of their own making, a realm shaped by their rebellion and sustained by their pride. Here, in this place of exile, Lucifer's transformation reached its completion. No longer could he be called the morning star or the son of the dawn. Now he bore a new name, one that reflected his new nature: Satan, the adversary, the accuser, the one who stands in opposition to all that is good and holy and true. Yet even in this moment of ultimate judgment, even as the great banishment was carried out, the heart of the Almighty was not without plan or purpose. For already, in the mind of the Eternal, the seeds of redemption were being planted. Already, the great drama of salvation was beginning to unfold, though it would be ages before mortal eyes would see its flowering. The banishment of Lucifer marked not just an ending, but also a beginning. It was the end of innocence in creation, the end of a time when all beings served the Creator in perfect harmony. But it was also the beginning of something far more profound, the demonstration of divine love that would ultimately triumph over rebellion, of grace that would prove stronger than judgment, of light that no darkness could ever fully extinguish. As the echoes of that cosmic judgment faded into eternity, heaven itself seemed to settle into a new configuration. The angels who remained drew closer to their Creator, their loyalty now tested and proven true. They had seen the consequences of pride and rebellion, and their devotion to the Most High was strengthened by their witness to His justice. The empty spaces left by the fallen angels were not filled with bitterness or fear, but with a deeper understanding of the precious nature of their relationship with the Creator. They had learned that love, to be genuine, must be freely chosen. They had seen that even the most exalted being could fall if pride took root in their heart. In the silence that followed the great banishment, a new song began to rise from the heavenly host. It was a song of praise, yes, but also a song of renewed commitment. It was a melody that spoke of justice, satisfied, and mercy prepared. It was a harmony that would echo through all the ages to come, a reminder that in the end, love will have the final word. And so the great banishment was complete. Lucifer, who had once walked among the fiery stones, who had once been the anointed cherub that covers, was now cast out from the presence of God. The rebellion that had begun in the secret places of his heart had reached its inevitable conclusion. Justice had been served, and the universe itself bore witness to the truth that no created being, however exalted, could successfully challenge the sovereignty of the Almighty. Yet this was not the end of the story, for even as Satan and his fallen angels found themselves in exile, even as they raged in the darkness of their separation from divine love, the wheels of redemption were already turning. The great plan of salvation, conceived in eternity past, was about to unfold in ways that would demonstrate the depth of divine love beyond all imagination. The banishment of Lucifer had created a void in creation, a wound that could only be healed by the ultimate sacrifice of love. And though the fallen angels did not know it, though they railed against their fate and plotted their revenge, they had actually set in motion the very events that would lead to the greatest display of divine glory the universe would ever witness. In casting out the rebel, God had also cleared the way for the ultimate revelation of his character. In allowing evil to show its true face, he had created the backdrop against which his goodness would shine with unprecedented brilliance. In permitting the darkness to gather, he had prepared the stage for the coming of the true light of the world. As this part of our journey draws to a close, we leave the heavenly realm forever changed by the events we have witnessed. The great banishment has been accomplished, justice has been served, and the universe has been marked by the eternal truth that rebellion against love can only lead to exile from its source. But the story continues, and in that continuation lies hope beyond measure. For the God who cast out the rebel is also the God who would one day descend into the very realm of that exile to reclaim what was lost, to restore what was broken, and to demonstrate that love is indeed stronger than death, grace more powerful than judgment, and light eternal in its triumph over darkness. Sleep now in the knowledge that even in judgment, love remains, and even in banishment, hope endures. The morning star may have fallen, but the sun of righteousness rises with healing in his wings, and in that rising, all creation finds its peace. As the cosmic echoes of that first rebellion began to settle across the heavenly realms, a profound transformation took place in the very fabric of creation itself. The expulsion of Lucifer and his fallen angels had torn open wounds in the spiritual atmosphere that would ripple through time and space, affecting not only the celestial hierarchy, but the very nature of reality as we know it. The aftermath of this divine judgment would reshape the relationship between heaven and earth, between the seen and unseen worlds, in ways that continue to influence our existence today. In the wake of Lucifer's banishment, the remaining angels witnessed something they had never seen before: the absolute finality of divine justice. Those who had remained loyal to the throne watched as their former companions, once radiant beings of light and glory, were transformed into creatures of darkness and despair. The very essence of their being had been altered by their rebellion, their luminous forms now twisted into shadows of their former selves. This transformation served as an eternal reminder of the consequences of pride and the immutable nature of God's righteousness. The loyal angels, led by Michael the archangel, found themselves with new responsibilities and deeper understanding of their calling. No longer could they take their position for granted or assume that their place in heaven was secure simply by virtue of their creation. They had witnessed firsthand that even the most exalted among them could fall from grace through the corruption of pride and the desire for independence from their Creator. This sobering reality instilled in them a profound reverence for the divine order and a renewed commitment to their sacred duties. Gabriel, whose voice had carried the commands of the Almighty across the cosmos, now understood the weight of his role as herald and messenger. He had seen how Lucifer's silver tongue had turned persuasion into manipulation, how eloquence could be corrupted into deception. This knowledge would inform every word he spoke, every message he delivered, ensuring that his communications remained pure channels of divine truth rather than vehicles for personal ambition or hidden agendas. The seraphim, those burning ones who stood closest to the throne and sang, "Holy, holy, holy," found their worship deepened by the contrast they had witnessed. Having seen the darkness that pride could bring, their proclamation of God's holiness carried new meaning and urgency. Their songs now celebrated not only the inherent glory of their Creator, but also His mercy, in allowing them to remain in His presence, despite the rebellion that had unfolded among their ranks. Meanwhile, in the depths of the abyss where Lucifer and his followers had been cast, a different kind of transformation was taking place. The former morning star, once the epitome of beauty and wisdom, now found himself in a realm devoid of the light he had once reflected so brilliantly. The absence of divine glory was not merely a physical darkness, but a spiritual void that penetrated to the very core of his being. Yet even in this state of exile and torment, his pride remained unbroken, his rebellion unrepentant. The fallen angels who had followed Lucifer in his insurrection now faced the eternal consequences of their choice. They had traded the glory of heaven for the desolation of the pit, exchanged their roles as ministers of light for existence as agents of darkness. Some among them began to comprehend the magnitude of their loss, the irreversible nature of their decision, but the hierarchy of rebellion that Lucifer had established prevented any expression of regret or desire for reconciliation. In this realm of exile, Lucifer began to plot his next moves, his brilliant mind now turned entirely toward destruction and revenge. If he could not rule in heaven, he would establish his dominion in the realm of darkness. If he could not be worshipped as God, he would corrupt those made in God's image. The serpent's cunning began to take shape, the strategy that would lead him to the Garden of Eden and the temptation of mankind. Back in the heavenly realms, God began to reveal to his faithful angels the next phase of his eternal plan. The rebellion of Lucifer had not caught the Almighty by surprise, nor had it derailed his purposes. Rather, it had set the stage for an even greater demonstration of his love, justice, and mercy. The angels learned that God intended to create a new kind of being fashioned in his own image, who would populate a physical realm called Earth. These new creatures, to be called humans, would possess something that angels did not: the ability to choose their destiny through free will exercised in a physical body. Unlike the angels, who had made their eternal choice in a moment of perfect knowledge. These humans would live in faith, making decisions based on trust rather than sight. This revelation filled the loyal angels with wonder and anticipation as they contemplated their future role as guardians and ministers to these beloved creatures. The cherubim, those mighty guardians of God's holiness, received special instructions regarding their future duties. They would be called upon to protect the sacred spaces where heaven and earth intersected, to guard the way to the tree of life, and to ensure that the holiness of God remained uncompromised even as he dwelt among his people. Their flaming swords would become symbols of divine protection and the preservation of sacred boundaries. As the angels contemplated these revelations, they began to understand that Lucifer's fall had not been the end of the story, but rather the beginning of an even grander narrative. The war between light and darkness would continue, but it would be fought on a new battlefield, with new participants, and ultimately with a predetermined outcome that would showcase the triumph of love over rebellion, of humility over pride. The transformation of the heavenly realm continued as new orders of angels were established to carry out specific missions related to God's plan for humanity. Guardian angels were appointed to watch over individual humans, while others were designated as warriors in the ongoing spiritual battle against the forces of darkness. The entire celestial hierarchy reorganized itself around the coming creation of mankind and the unfolding drama of redemption. In quiet moments between their duties, the angels would gather to sing new songs of praise, compositions that celebrated not only God's power and glory, but also his wisdom in bringing good from evil, light from darkness, and ultimately eternal victory from temporary defeat. These hymns spoke of mysteries yet to be revealed, of a love so profound that it would drive the Creator to enter his own creation, to suffer alongside his creatures, and to pay the ultimate price for their redemption. The memory of Lucifer's rebellion served as a constant reminder to all of heaven's inhabitants that their position was not earned but granted, not deserved but gifted. This humility became the foundation of their continued service, ensuring that pride would never again find fertile ground in the courts of heaven. The angels learned to see their roles not as entitlements, but as privileges, not as rights, but as sacred trusts to be stewarded with care and reverence. As this cosmic reorganization continued, the stage was being set for the next great act in the divine drama. The creation of the universe would soon begin, with stars and planets, seas and lands, all prepared as the setting for God's greatest work. The creation of beings who would be made in his own image, capable of love and choice, destined for eternal fellowship with their Creator, despite the presence of evil in the world. The angels watched with growing anticipation as God prepared to speak the words that would bring forth light from darkness, order from chaos, and ultimately hope from despair. They had witnessed the consequences of rebellion and the justice of divine judgment. Now they would see the power of divine love in action, the lengths to which their Creator would go to restore what had been broken and to bring his wayward children home. As we draw closer to the end of our exploration into the disturbing lives of the pharaohs, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of eternity itself, where the mortal realm meets the divine. The ancient Egyptian pharaohs, for all their earthly power and splendor, were ultimately consumed by one overwhelming obsession: the pursuit of immortality. This fixation on the afterlife would drive them to extraordinary lengths, shaping not only their reigns, but the very fabric of Egyptian civilization itself. The pharaoh's preparations for death began the moment they ascended to the throne. Unlike modern rulers who might focus on legacy through policy or monument, the pharaohs understood that their true test lay not in this world, but in the next. Every decision, every construction project, every ritual performed was viewed through the lens of eternal consequence. The tomb was not merely a resting place, but a launching pad for the soul's journey to join the gods among the stars. Consider the meticulous planning that went into these eternal dwellings. The Valley of the Kings, that hidden necropolis carved into the cliffs west of Thebes, represents perhaps the most ambitious cemetery project in human history. Here, generation after generation of pharaohs hollowed out elaborate underground palaces, each more complex than the last. These weren't simply burial chambers, but entire subterranean cities designed to house the pharaoh's kai, or soul, for all eternity. The walls of these tombs were covered with intricate paintings and hieroglyphs that served as more than mere decoration. They were instruction manuals for the afterlife, detailing the pharaoh's journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. The Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, and other funerary texts were carefully inscribed to guide the deceased ruler through the perils that awaited beyond the grave. Every spell, every incantation was a weapon against the demons and obstacles that might prevent the pharaoh from reaching his divine destiny. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the human costs of these preparations. The practice of retainer sacrifice, while eventually abandoned, reveals the depths of the pharaoh's conviction that death was merely a transition to continued rule. Servants, concubines, and even beloved pets were sometimes killed to accompany their master into eternity. The tomb of one early pharaoh contained the remains of over 300 individuals, all sacrificed to serve their king in death as they had in life. The silent rows of bodies, carefully arranged around the royal burial chamber, speak to a worldview in which the pharaoh's needs transcended even the basic right to life of his subjects. As Egyptian civilization evolved, these practices became more symbolic, but no less elaborate. The famous Shabti figurines, small mummified statues placed in tombs by the hundreds, were believed to come to life in the afterworld to perform manual labor for the deceased pharaoh. Even in death, these god kings expected to live in the style to which they had become accustomed, surrounded by servants and luxury. The mummification process itself was an exercise in preserving divinity. The 70-day ritual was as much about spiritual transformation as physical preservation. The removal of organs, the desiccation with natron salt, the careful wrapping in linen bandages infused with protective spells. Every step was designed to ensure that the pharaoh's body would serve as a suitable vessel for his eternal soul. The golden death masks, like that of Tutankhamun, were not merely beautiful artifacts, but powerful magical tools designed to preserve the pharaoh's divine identity throughout eternity. Yet for all their elaborate preparations, the pharaohs could not escape the fundamental irony of their situation. Their very efforts to achieve immortality often ensured their eventual desecration. The wealth they accumulated for the afterlife attracted tomb robbers throughout the ages. The monuments they built to proclaim their eternal glory became targets for later rulers seeking to erase their memory and claim their achievements. Even their mummified bodies, so carefully preserved, were often damaged or destroyed by those seeking the valuable amulets and jewelry buried with them. Perhaps most telling is the fate of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who dared to revolutionize Egyptian religion. His attempt to establish monotheistic worship of the Aten was so thoroughly rejected by his successors that they systematically destroyed his monuments, defaced his statues, and struck his name from official records. The man who proclaimed himself the living embodiment of the sun god was condemned to the Egyptian equivalent of damnation, to be forgotten, his name unspoken, his memory erased. The story of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, provides a fitting end to this 3,000-year dynasty. Despite her intelligence, political acumen, and determination to preserve Egyptian independence, she could not prevent the inevitable absorption of her kingdom into the Roman Empire. Her suicide by aspi bite was perhaps the final act of pharaonic defiance, choosing death on her own terms rather than subjugation to foreign rule. With her passing, the age of the god-kings came to an end, and Egypt became merely another province in someone else's empire. Today, as we stand in museums, gazing upon the treasures of these ancient rulers, we are witnessing both their triumph and their tragedy. They achieved a form of immortality, not through divine transformation, but through human memory. Their names are indeed spoken after thousands of years, their stories retold, their monuments still standing as testaments to their ambition. Yet this immortality came at a cost that few would willingly pay: the reduction of their complex humanity to museum displays and tourist attractions. The pharaohs remind us that power, no matter how absolute, cannot ultimately conquer death. Their elaborate preparations for eternity, their conviction in their own divinity, their willingness to sacrifice others for their own immortal goals, all of these speak to a fundamental human fear of mortality and a desperate desire for meaning beyond the grave. In their excesses, we see reflected our own anxieties about death and legacy. As the sands of time continue to shift across the monuments they built, the pharaohs remain frozen in their eternal poses, hands crossed over their chests, eyes staring into an infinity they were so certain they would inherit. Their disturbing lives serve as both inspiration and warning. Inspiration for the heights of human achievement and artistic creation, but warning about the dangers of unchecked power and the delusions of grandeur. In the end, perhaps the most profound truth about the pharaohs is that they were, despite their claims to divinity, profoundly human. They loved and hated, feared and hoped, created and destroyed with all the passion and fallibility of mortals. Their story is our story, writ large in gold and stone, a reminder that even those who claim to touch the heavens must ultimately return to the dust from which they came. As we close this exploration into the shadowed corridors of pharaonic power, we carry with us the echoes of their whispered dreams of immortality. Dreams that continue to resonate through the centuries, reminding us that the quest for meaning beyond death remains one of humanity's most enduring and troubling obsessions. The pharaohs may be gone, but their disturbing legacy lives on, challenging us to examine our own relationship with power, mortality, and the eternal human desire to leave something lasting behind. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the golden light of ancient Egypt, where gods walked among mortals and eternity seemed within reach of those bold enough to grasp for it. The silence that followed was unlike any silence the heavens had ever known. It was not the gentle stillness of worship, nor the sacred hush that descends when the Almighty speaks. This was a silence heavy with absence, thick with sorrow, a vacuum where joy had once flowed like rivers of light. The rebellion was over. The war in heaven had ended, not with a climactic clash of equals, but with the inevitable triumph of the Creator's will. Lucifer and his legions had been cast out, expelled from the holy mountain, their cries of defiance fading into the void as they plummeted into exile. The heavenly host, those who had stood steadfast through the conflict, now found themselves standing in a realm that felt both familiar and forever changed, where once the courts of heaven had pulsed with a perfect harmony of voices, seraphim calling to cherubim, archangels guiding legions in songs of praise. Now there was only stillness, a stillness that seemed to seep into every corner of eternity, a stillness that made even the brightest stars seem dim by comparison. For the first time since their creation, the angels experienced grief. Not anger, not fear, but a profound and aching grief that settled in their hearts like a weight too heavy to bear. They had lost brothers and sisters, companions with whom they had sung since the dawn of creation. They remembered the radiance of those now fallen, remembered their laughter, their voices lifting in perfect pitch, their wings flashing in unison as they danced in the presence of the Most High. To see that light extinguished, to know those voices would never again join the chorus of heaven, this was a sorrow beyond words. Michael, the great archangel who had led the armies of the faithful, stood alone at the edge of the crystal sea. His sword, once aflame with righteous fire, now rested point down in the glassy expanse. He gazed into the infinite depths, his reflection fractured and shifting in the divine light. He had carried out his duty, and yet there was no triumph in his heart, only a quiet, solemn reverence for the justice that had been done, and a lingering sadness for those who had chosen rebellion over love. Gabriel, the messenger of God, hovered nearby, his wings folded close in an uncharacteristic posture of stillness. He too felt the weight of this cosmic moment. He recalled delivering warnings to some of the fallen, whispering truths, in the hope they might turn back before it was too late. But the seeds of pride had taken root too deeply. His words had fallen on hearts already hardened. Now his lips, once so quick to proclaim the glory of God, could form no words at all. Around them, the seraphim and cherubim gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed, their flames dimmed. Even the perpetual cry of "Holy, holy, holy" seemed softer now, as if they were whispering rather than shouting their praise. The loss was not theirs alone. It was creation's loss, a scar now etched into the perfect fabric of the eternal. Yet through the sorrow, a new understanding began to emerge among the faithful. They realized, with hearts both heavy and enlightened, that their service to the Almighty was not a matter of inevitability. It was a choice they had made and would continue to make. They saw now how even in the perfection of heaven, love could not be coerced, worship could not be demanded. What gave their devotion meaning was precisely the possibility of rejection, the freedom to walk away as Lucifer had done. The Most High did not speak immediately. His throne, wreathed in unapproachable light, remained shrouded in mystery, but his presence was no less palpable for the silence. The angels felt it like a steady heartbeat beneath their grief, a quiet assurance that even this tragedy had not escaped the scope of divine wisdom. The Almighty was neither surprised nor diminished. His plan had not faltered. His purpose had not wavered. In time, the silence gave way to song, not the jubilant choruses of old, but a softer, more contemplative hymn. It rose first from the seraphim, their voices quivering like candles in the dark. Great and terrible is your love, O Lord. Who can withstand it? Who can deny it? We are yours, by choice, by joy, by endless devotion. One by one, other voices joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the heavenly courts with a music unlike any that had been heard before. It was not the sound of unbroken innocence, but of tested faith. It was the sound of loyalty proven in fire, of love that had seen the alternative and chosen, freely, to remain steadfast. And as the last echoes of rebellion faded into the void, the faithful hosts stood in renewed awe of the one who had made them. They understood now, in a way they never could have before, that his holiness was not mere power, but a love so vast and so free that it allowed even the possibility of betrayal. The silence after the fall was not an ending, it was the stillness before a new beginning. There are no words in any language, mortal or celestial, that can fully capture the moment when light became darkness. Lucifer, the morning star, once robed in brilliance, now drifted through a void so complete it seemed to consume even memory itself. Gone, was the golden radiance of the throne room. Gone the gentle hum of seraphic wings. Gone the harmony that had once resonated through his very being. Here, in this exile of his own making, there was only silence. Dense, suffocating, and unbroken. He did not fall as one plummets from a great height. No, his descent was stranger, slower, more terrible. It was like being unmade thread by thread, as if every layer of beauty, wisdom, and power that had adorned him was being peeled away. Yet even as these trappings of glory were stripped from him, something remained. Something hardened. Something proud. Lucifer's eyes, once mirrors of the divine light, now burned with a fire not of heaven, but of his own restless fury. He floated in this dark chasm, his wings, torn and smouldering, curling inward like withered leaves. The pain was not physical, though it felt as if his very essence were unraveling. It was a deeper agony, the realization of what he had lost, and more bitter still, the knowledge that he would not, could not, repent. He whispered into the void, his voice hoarse yet defiant. "I am still. I am." But even he could hear the hollowness in his declaration. Once he had been the voice that led the choirs of heaven, the harmonies of countless hosts rising at his command. Now his words fell flat, swallowed whole by a darkness that gave nothing back, not echo, not answer, not even acknowledgement. Around him, others stirred, his followers, his co-conspirators. They too bore the marks of exile, their forms diminished, their light corrupted. Some wept, some raged, others drifted aimlessly, stunned by the enormity of what they had chosen. But all of them looked to him, still, as though his defiance could substitute for their lost glory. Yet Lucifer, no longer morning star, no longer light-bearer, felt the weight of their gaze like chains. In their eyes, he saw not admiration, but dependence, not faith, but fear. They had followed him believing his promise of freedom, of self-sovereignty, of godhood. Now they saw only a prince without a kingdom, a leader cast into the same abyss as his army. But pride does not die easily. He straightened, though his wings quivered with the effort, and spoke again, this time louder, as if willing the darkness to listen. "I will not bend. I will not kneel. If I cannot ascend, I will descend and reign there. If heaven rejects me, then I will carve my dominion in the dust beneath their feet." These words stirred the others, their dim auras flickering like dying embers catching a breath of wind. From despair rose a murmur of assent, then a chorus of voices, broken, bitter, yet resolute. Here, in this place where no light penetrated, a new allegiance was born. Not the joyous harmony of heaven, but a grim unity forged in shared exile and unyielding pride. Lucifer's mind, sharp even in his fall, began to weave plans. The Almighty had created a new realm, a fragile sphere of light and life suspended in the cosmos. He had heard whispers of it before the rebellion. A place where creatures of flesh and spirit would walk in innocence, their hearts free, their wills unshackled. Fools, he thought, his lip curling. He gives them the gift of choice, the very freedom for which I was cast out. They will squander it as all weak things do, and when they fall, I will be there to offer them what their Creator denies. In that moment, Lucifer's transformation was complete. He was no longer the morning star, no longer the covering cherub who had once stood nearest the throne. He was Satan now, the adversary, the accuser, the prince of darkness. His beauty, though not entirely gone, had curdled into something terrible. Where once his presence inspired awe, now it evoked dread. His voice, once like music, now carried the subtle hiss of a serpent. Around him, his legions stirred, their own forms growing grotesque, their light turned to shadow, their songs twisted into echoes of lament. Some clung to his every word, desperate for purpose in their ruin. Others watched with silent resentment, already wondering if following him had been their greatest mistake. But none dared speak it aloud. Not yet. And so the first council of the damned gathered in the abyss. No throne, no kingdom, only a raw determination to oppose the God they could no longer approach. They would not surrender. They would not ask forgiveness. If they could not reign in heaven, they would reign in hell. If they could not destroy the Almighty, they would corrupt his creation, mar his image wherever it could be found. Lucifer raised his scorched wings, and though the act caused him pain, he forced them outward like a banner. "We will not be forgotten," he declared, his voice steady now, filled with a venomous confidence. "We will make war from the shadows. We will twist what is pure, defile what is sacred, and drag down all that he holds dear. Let him watch as his beloved creation chooses me over him." For the first time since the fall, a sound echoed in that dark place, a low, hollow laughter. It began in Lucifer's throat and spread through the host of fallen angels until it became a chorus of mockery, a chilling prelude to the havoc they would unleash. But far above, in the realms of light, the Almighty watched, not in fear, not in surprise, but with a sorrow deeper than the abyss itself. For he knew that even this rebellion, even this exile, would serve his purpose in the end. He had already woven a plan of redemption that no darkness could overcome, a light that no hatred could extinguish. And so, while Lucifer plotted in the shadows, the heavens prepared for a new chapter, a creation that would carry within it both the seeds of rebellion and the hope of salvation. The exile of the morning star was complete, but the war was only beginning. In the aftermath of rebellion, the heavens were still. Not the stillness of peace, but of reflection, a quiet so profound that even the stars seemed to hold their light a little closer, as if unsure how to shine in a realm forever marked by loss. The faithful angels gathered not out of fear, for fear was alien to them, but out of longing, longing to understand, to find meaning in what had unfolded, to strengthen one another in their devotion. They met in a vast expanse where crystal light pooled like a great ocean, its surface rippling softly with unseen currents. Here, in the open spaces of eternity, no walls enclosed them, no ceiling contained them. Only the infinite canopy of God's presence stretched above, its radiance so gentle it seemed to cradle their wounded spirits. Michael stood at the center, his countenance solemn yet unshaken. His armor still bore faint traces of the battle, the slightest dimming of its sheen where the conflict had raged fiercest, but his eyes shone with a steadfast clarity. Around him, ranks of archangels and hosts of seraphim and cherubim gathered in reverent silence, their wings folding in unison like petals closing against the night. He began to speak, not with the commanding tone of a warrior, but with the quiet authority of one who had seen too much to remain unchanged. "Brothers, sisters, you have stood firm. You have endured the shaking of the heavens and the tearing of fellowship. You have watched as those we loved chose darkness over light, pride over love, their own will over the will of the one who made them. You have grieved, as I have grieved. But now we must look forward." A hush fell deeper over the gathering as Michael's voice carried across the assembly, resonating with the weight of eternity. "We are not the same as we were before the fall. We know now what it means for a will to turn from its creator. We know what pride can do, even here. But in knowing this, we have been made stronger, not in power, but in understanding. Our loyalty has been tested. Our devotion has been refined as gold in the fire. Gabriel stepped forward then, his luminous form bright, but his expression tinged with sorrow. He had carried the voice of the Almighty across the cosmos, but this was the first time he spoke not as a messenger, but as one who had been forever marked by what he had seen. The Most High has shown us that love cannot be compelled. Worship has meaning only when it is freely given. We have witnessed the cost of that freedom, the loss of so many, the rending of our harmony. But we have also witnessed the beauty of choice made in faith. We chose to remain. We chose to trust. And in that choice lies the foundation of all that is good and true. Across the gathering, soft murmurs of agreement rippled like wind through a field of light. Angels who had once known only joy now felt a deeper resonance in their worship. A gratitude born not of innocence, but of awareness. A seraph, her 6 wings folded like veils of fire around her, spoke with a voice like the low hum of coals. What then is our calling in this new order? We have defended the holiness of heaven, but is that all? What of the realms yet to be shaped, the creatures yet to be formed? What of the humans the Almighty will fashion in his own image? Michael and Gabriel exchanged a glance heavy with knowledge granted in quiet moments near the throne. It was Gabriel who answered. The Creator's purpose has not faltered. He will bring forth a world of life, a realm of flesh and spirit intertwined. Upon this earth, beings will walk in his likeness, not in power or glory as we know it, but in capacity for love, for trust, for worship. They will be given what Lucifer demanded for himself: dominion over a realm, freedom to choose, the breath of God within their mortal frames. There was a pause as the magnitude of these words settled like dew on the gathered hosts. Some felt awe, others a flicker of apprehension. To grant such freedom was to risk again the pain they had just endured. A cherub, his voice deep and resonant, spoke from within his great wings. Will they not fall as he fell? Will their hearts too turn from the one who formed them? Michael's eyes softened with a strange mix of sorrow and hope. Some may fall, many will stumble, but their story is not ours to write. Ours is to watch, to guide, to guard. For though rebellion may rise again, so too will redemption. The Almighty has already foreseen the end from the beginning. Even in their weakness, his glory will be revealed. A low hymn began to rise among the angels then, not the triumphant song of victory, but a melody more tender, woven from sorrow and devotion. It spoke of loyalty tempered by loss, of faith deepened by trial. The seraphim took up the song, their voices like flames dancing in the cool air. Holy is the one who loves with perfect love. Holy is the one who judges with perfect justice. Holy is the one who weaves all things, loss and triumph, darkness and light, into his eternal design. The hymn swelled, filling the expanse with a resonance that reached even into the farthest edges of creation. It was a declaration, not to the fallen, not to humanity, but to themselves. A renewal of their allegiance, not born of fear, but of love freely chosen. As the last note faded, Michael raised his hand in benediction. Go now to your stations. Some of you will guard the holy places. Some will carry messages across the stars. Some will walk unseen among the mortals yet to come. Whatever your task, remember, you serve not because you must, but because you choose. And in that choice lies the strength of all heaven. The gathering dispersed like stars scattering at dawn, each angel returning to their place, with wings lifted a little higher, hearts anchored a little deeper in the knowledge that their worship was no longer the song of untested innocence. It was the anthem of love proven by fire. And above them all, unseen but ever present, The Almighty watched, his gaze tender yet unflinching, his plans unfolding with a wisdom that no rebellion could ever thwart. The Council of the Faithful had ended, but their new mission had only just begun. It began not with sound, but with a breath so deep, so vast, that it seemed to ripple across the empty canvas of eternity, stirring the darkness like a gentle wind across still waters. And then a word: "Let there be light." The voice of the Almighty rolled through the void, not like thunder, not like fire, but like a still, sure presence that needed no volume to command all things. And where there had been nothing, suddenly there was light, not merely illumination, but life, energy, possibility. It burst forth in a brilliance that no eye, mortal or angelic, could fully behold. It was not the light of sun or star, but a primal radiance, pure and undivided, flooding the newly born cosmos with warmth and purpose. The faithful angels, gathered in the heights, watched in awestruck silence. Even they, who had stood near the throne since the dawn of their own existence, had never witnessed this. Creation itself unfolding, reality spinning out from the words of their Creator. Gabriel's wings trembled as he whispered to no one in particular. This is his voice, shaping worlds. Michael, standing beside him, could only nod, his eyes reflecting the swirling lights as galaxies coalesced in vast spirals, their stars flaring to life like sparks from the forge of eternity. Day and night were born as the Almighty separated light from darkness. And though the darkness had been the domain where rebellion once whispered, now it too became part of the divine design, no longer a void of despair, but a necessary counterpoint, a canvas upon which light could shine all the brighter. On the second day, the voice spoke again. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. The seas below churned as vapor rose to form skies above, billowing clouds and deep blue heavens, a vast expanse that would cradle winds and storms, rains and gentle breezes. The angels saw layers of beauty taking shape, the first contours of a world that would one day teem with life. By the third day, land emerged from the depths, and with it, the first signs of green. Grasses unfolded like a carpet across hills, trees stretched their arms toward the heavens, and flowers bloomed in colours the angels had never seen. The fragrance of blossoms filled the new air, drifting upwards like incense. One seraph spoke, her voice soft as a sigh. He creates not with necessity, but with delight. See how even the smallest petal reflects his joy. And then, as the Creator's words continued, the world burst into ever greater complexity. On the fourth day, the sun blazed into being, its light soft at first, then fierce and golden. The moon was set as a gentle guardian of the night, her silver glow scattering across oceans. Stars were flung like jewels across the velvet sky, each one placed with care, each one singing in frequencies only angels could hear. They sing, murmured Gabriel, tears bright in his eyes. The stars sing back to him. The fifth day brought life to the seas and skies. Whales breached from depths so newly formed, their waters still whispered of creation's first breath. Birds unfolded their wings and took to the air, their songs weaving with the rushing winds in a symphony of life. But it was on the sixth day that the heavens held their breath. For now the Almighty knelt, not because he needed to, but because he chose intimacy where only command was required. With hands unseen but infinitely tender, he shaped a new kind of being from the dust of the earth. The angels leaned closer, their eyes wide, for here was something different, not fire like seraphim, not radiant light like themselves, flesh, bone, breath, fragile, and yet carrying within it a spark of the divine. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Dust rose and gathered into form, eyes closed, chest still, a body so simple yet so wondrous. And then, the breath. The Almighty breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man opened his eyes. Adam. The first human drew his first breath under a sky so fresh it had never known a storm. His heart beat in time with the pulse of creation itself. Around him, trees offered fruit, rivers murmured promises of abundance, animals stirred in gentle curiosity. The garden was a cradle of peace. The angels gazed at him in silence, marveling at this strange new creature who bore no wings, no flame, yet carried within his mortal frame the very image of their Creator. But not all were silent out of wonder. Far below, in the shadows beyond creation's edge, another watched. His eyes, once radiant with heaven's light, now smoldered with envy. Lucifer, now Satan, beheld Adam with a cold, calculating gaze. So this is his chosen image. This is the one he loves, the one he crowns with dominion. A creature of mud and breath he will not endure. I will see to that. But in the heavens, the faithful sang. Their voices rose gently, not as a triumphant hymn, but as a lullaby, blessing the newborn earth and its inhabitants. Blessed are you, O Creator of all. You bring forth life from nothing. You crown dust with glory. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And as the sun set on the sixth day, a hush fell over creation. The Almighty looked upon all he had made, and it was very good. On the seventh day, he rested, not from weariness, but to bless the stillness, to sanctify time itself, to teach his creatures that even in their work they must remember to be still and know that he is God. The angels remained in their stations, watching, waiting. They knew this world would soon become the battlefield of a great and terrible war. But for now, there was only peace, only beauty, only the quiet joy of a new creation bathed in the love of its maker. Far beneath the realms of light, where the memory of heaven had grown faint and cold, a darkness stirred, not the passive quiet of absence, but the restless, coiling shadow of an intellect that had once shone brighter than any star. Lucifer, no longer the morning star, no longer the light-bearer, drifted in this abyss of his own making, his wings charred and twisted, his beauty now a cruel echo of what it had been. But though his radiance was gone, his mind remained sharp, razor-sharp, honed now not by the love of God, but by hatred, envy, and ambition. He watched. In the far distance, beyond the veils of uncreated realms, the new world shimmered like a fragile jewel. Earth, a sphere of blues and greens and golds, spinning serenely in the void. And in its heart, the garden, Eden, a sanctuary of innocence and beauty so profound it seemed an insult to his exile. There, among flowering trees and crystal streams, he saw them, the humans. Adam and Eve moved with a childlike grace, their faces open and unshadowed by fear or shame. They laughed together under the boughs of ancient trees, their hands touching as they marveled at the creatures entrusted to their care. Birds settled on their shoulders without fear. Lions lay at their feet like tame cats. Every breath they took was an act of worship, though they did not yet know the word. Satan's eyes narrowed, burning with a cold, calculating fire. So these are his beloved. These fragile things of dust and breath, he calls them his image, his delight. He remembered the throne room of God, the blazing glory, the choirs of millions. And he remembered the words that had sealed his fate. You shall be cast down. Now, from his place of exile, he whispered words that chilled even his own followers. If I cannot rise to the heavens, I will drag heaven down to me. Around him, the other fallen angels hovered in uneasy silence. Some still bore traces of their former beauty, though it was marred now by doubt and despair. Others, their forms already warped by rebellion, stirred restlessly, their loyalty unspoken but expected. One dared to ask, his voice thin and strained, "What will you do?" Satan's gaze did not waver from the garden. His smile was a serpentine thing, subtle, patient, dangerous. "I will not strike with force, not yet. The Almighty has placed his image in these creatures, yes, but he has also given them something else. Freedom. Choice. That was his mistake. The same freedom that undid me will undo them." He began to pace the void, his mind weaving threads of deceit as a spider weaves a web. Look at them, innocent, trusting, unaware. He forbids them but one thing, a tree, a single tree. How quaint, how fragile is their obedience if tested. If I can make them doubt his word, if I can make them desire what is forbidden, then their fall will echo louder than my own. For in their fall, I will see his beloved creation tarnished, his image corrupted, his plan turned against him. A murmur of approval rippled through the host of the fallen. For the first time since their exile, there was purpose in their leader's words. Purpose beyond mere rage, beyond hollow defiance. This was a plan, a strategy. I will take a form that does not frighten them, something subtle, something beautiful, yet cunning. The serpent. He closed his eyes and imagined it. Scales glistening like emeralds in the sun, eyes deep and hypnotic, a voice like silk. Not the roar of a lion, not the bellow of thunder. No, a whisper, a question, a doubt planted so gently they would not even notice until it had taken root. Did God really say? The words felt like poison on his tongue, and he savoured the taste. I will speak not in anger, but in curiosity, not in accusation, but in suggestion. And they, these creatures of dust, will listen. Oh yes, they will listen, for curiosity is their nature, and pride lies dormant even in innocence. His followers began to shift in the darkness, embers of malice glowing in their eyes. Some offered their own thoughts. If they fall, will he not destroy them as he cast us out? Satan's smile widened. Number. He loves them too much. That is his weakness. He will not destroy them. But their guilt will separate them from him as surely as our rebellion did. And in that separation I will reign. Their shame will be my crown. Their fear, my fortress. Their death, my dominion. The plan settled like a stone at the center of a black pool. Ripples spread outward, unseen but inevitable. And far above, in Eden, Adam and Eve laughed, oblivious. They knew nothing yet of betrayal, nothing of fear or pain. The air they breathed was still heavy with the scent of the Creator's love, the ground beneath their feet still warm from his presence. But the serpent was coming. The heavens too felt the tremor of what was about to unfold. Michael, vigilant in the heights, whispered to Gabriel, "The enemy stirs." Gabriel's eyes turned toward Eden, sorrowful yet resolute. Then the true battle begins. In the shadows, Satan coiled and uncoiled, his thoughts sharp as blades. He would not strike today nor tomorrow. He would wait, he would watch. For the corruption of innocence is a delicate art, and he was now the master of it. "I will not come as a conqueror," he murmured. "I will come as a friend." And so, in the silence of that waiting, the plot was set. The serpent's path was chosen, and all of creation held its breath, unaware that the echo of a choice made long ago was about to repeat itself in the hearts of two unsuspecting souls. At the heart of the new world, nestled like a jewel in the palm of the Creator's hand, there lay a garden. It was not vast in the way of deserts or oceans, yet it felt infinite, as though eternity itself had paused to admire its perfection. The Garden of Eden. Here, light moved with a softness unknown outside its borders, as though even the sun revered this sacred place and chose not to intrude too fiercely. Gentle mists rose from hidden springs, weaving through groves of ancient trees whose roots seemed to drink directly from the breath of God. Every leaf shimmered with an inner glow. Each petal bore a hue so vivid it seemed the palette of creation had been poured out unrestrained. Birdsong wove through the air like threads of silver, each note distinct, yet all harmonizing in a melody that seemed older than time. Rivers curved through the garden with a deliberate grace, their waters so clear they mirrored not only the sky, but the dreams of heaven itself. Lions and lambs drank side by side, their reflections unbroken by fear. Eagles soared overhead, their wings slicing the air with effortless majesty. And in the midst of it all, Adam and Eve. They moved through Eden like living prayers, their steps light upon the earth as though it had been made only for them. Adam's hands were strong, yet gentle, as he named each creature that approached him, the names flowing from his lips with an authority that surprised even the angels watching from above. Eve's laughter rang out, bright and unguarded, as she reached to caress a dove settling on her shoulder, or gathered blossoms to weave into Adam's hair. There was no shame here, no sorrow, no shadow. Their eyes met often, untainted by suspicion or desire for power. They were companions, equal in dignity, united in purpose, their lives a song of gratitude to the one who had breathed them into being. Gabriel watched from the heights, his heart stirred by a tenderness he had never known. He spoke softly to Michael. "They are so small, and yet I see his image in them. Can such fragile vessels truly bear such glory?" Michael's gaze remained fixed on the pair below, his expression unreadable. It is not their strength that reflects him, but their freedom, and therein lies their danger. For though the garden was perfect, there was within it a tree set apart, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It stood at the center, its branches heavy with fruit, so alluring it seemed to glow faintly in the soft light. And with it, the command, "You shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." To Adam and Eve, the tree was simply there. Mysterious, yes, but unthreatening. They had no reason to doubt the word of the Creator who walked with them in the cool of the day, whose voice spoke to them not in riddles, but in gentle instruction. But unseen in the shadows beyond the garden's borders, another watched. Satan, coiled now in the form of a serpent, surveyed the scene with eyes like molten gold. His thoughts were sharp as fangs, his patience honed to a predator's stillness. He saw how they laughed, how they trusted, how they passed by the forbidden tree without lingering. "They do not yet know hunger," he mused, his tongue flickering to taste the air. "Not for food, but for knowledge. That hunger, I will awaken it." The serpent wound silently around a low branch, his scales catching stray beams of light. He did not move closer yet. His time had not come. He would wait. Wait until trust had lulled them fully into ease, until curiosity began to stir in the quiet corners of their minds. In the meantime, Adam and Eve continued their tending of the garden. Together they worked, though their labor was not toil, but joy, naming, planting, delighting in each new creature and bloom. They marveled at the design of each leaf, the colors of every bird, the laughter of streams as they tumbled over stones. When evening came, they would sit beneath the great tree at the center of the garden, not the forbidden one, but the tree of life. Its branches arched above them like a canopy of emerald flame, its fruit luminous in the fading light. Here they would rest, listening for the sound of their Creator's footsteps. And when he came, His presence filled the air with a peace so deep it seemed even the wind held its breath in reverence. The angels above could scarcely bear the beauty of it all. Seraphim whispered hymns that wove around the edges of creation, unseen but felt as a gentle warmth on the skin, a faint breeze in the leaves. Cherubim, set to guard the sacred borders, watched with vigilant love, their fiery forms pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the garden. But Michael remained solemn, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He felt the tension rising like unseen storm clouds. For even in this place of light, he sensed the approach of shadow. "They know only innocence," he said quietly, almost to himself. But innocence is not the same as righteousness. Innocence is untested. Righteousness is chosen. Eve reached to pluck a blossom from a nearby tree, her fingers brushing its soft petals. Adam smiled at her, his face open and unburdened. They had no reason to guard their hearts. No reason to suspect that the enemy had already found his way in. Not with force, not with noise, but with patient, coiled intent. The serpent watched and waited. The morning in Eden was hushed, as if even the wind had chosen to still its breath. Dew clung to every leaf like 1,000 tiny jewels, refracting the gentle light of a sun unmarked by time or shadow. Birds sang their delicate choruses, and the rivers murmured as they made their way through the garden's flowering banks. Adam was not far, tending to a grove of young fig trees. His hands brushed the soil with reverence, his voice low as he spoke tenderly to the creatures that lingered near him. But Eve wandered alone today, her steps unhurried, her eyes drinking in the colors and shapes of the world around her. She moved like a melody, the air shifting softly as she passed. The serpents of the garden, their scales shimmering like emerald and gold, watched her with curious eyes, their tongues flickering to taste the sweetness in the air. But one among them did not simply watch. Coiled in the branches of the forbidden tree, his scales glinting faintly in the dappled light, lay a serpent unlike the rest. His body, sleek and sinuous, seemed to melt into the shadows of the leaves. His eyes, pools of molten amber, followed Eve's every movement with a patience older than the world itself. And then, in a voice so subtle it could have been mistaken for her own thought, he spoke. "Did God really say?" The words drifted to her like a question half-formed, as though plucked from the edges of her subconscious. She stopped, startled, her hand pausing mid-air as she reached for a blossom. Slowly, she turned her head toward the tree. There he was, the serpent resting along a thick branch, his coils shifting almost imperceptibly. His voice, when it came again, was smooth as silk and soft as a whisper carried by the wind. "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Eve blinked, surprised to hear speech where none should have been. Yet there was no fear in her. Why would there be? All creatures here were friends. And this serpent, with his gentle tone and golden eyes, seemed almost wise. She tilted her head, studying him. "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden," she said slowly, her voice uncertain yet unguarded. "But God said, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." The serpent's tongue flickered, tasting the air between them. His eyes softened, not with kindness, but with a calculated mimicry of it. "Die," he murmured, his tone laced with quiet amusement. "You will not surely die." The words hung in the air like a perfumed mist, intoxicating, clinging. Eve frowned slightly, her gaze flickering toward the tree, its fruit glowing faintly in the dappled light. The serpent shifted his coils, his movements slow, deliberate, as though his very presence carried no threat, but only invitation. God knows, he continued, his voice growing warmer, smoother, that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. The suggestion lingered, delicate yet powerful, like a seed falling into fertile soil. Eve's eyes moved from the serpent to the tree. The fruit, it seemed different now, richer in color, fuller in shape. She had never looked at it quite this way before. You will not die, the serpent repeated softly. You will awaken, you will become more. And something stirred within her, a flicker of curiosity, faint but insistent. Why had they been forbidden? What was hidden here that even they, the caretakers of Eden, were not meant to know? Gabriel, watching unseen from the heights, felt a pang of sorrow pierce his being. She lingers too long, he whispered to Michael. The seed of doubt is planted. But Michael's gaze remained steady, his jaw set. It was always their choice to make. Below, the serpent's voice wove around Eve like a vine, gentle, alluring. See how it shines. See how perfect it is. Would the Creator truly withhold such a gift from you? Did he not say you were made in his image? Then why keep you from becoming like him? Eve's breath quickened. The fruit now seemed to pulse faintly with light, its fragrance sweet on the breeze. Her fingers brushed against her lips unconsciously, as though tasting in her mind what had not yet touched her tongue. The serpent watched, unblinking. He did not press further. He did not need to. The thought was alive now, blooming within her. What harm could there be? Why would he forbid what is so beautiful? Why would he say no, unless he feared what we might become? The question, silent yet deafening, echoed through her mind. The serpent's eyes gleamed. His work was done. He had not commanded. He had only suggested. He had not lied outright. He had only nudged the truth into a shape that served his purpose. And now he waited, coiled in silence, watching. For he knew the greatest victories are not won by force, but by turning the heart.